Sometime a man reaches the edge of everything he's lost before he realizes something inside him is still alive. Ford Baxter felt that truth pounding in his chest as he stood in an empty field, staring at the rusted school bus sinking half-dead into the dirt. 44 years old, sober for only a handful of months, he was a man rebuilding his life from splintered edges. His marriage gone. His daughter gone. His livelihood swallowed by the bottle he once trusted more than people. Yet this bus, rotted floor, shattered windows, ribs exposed, felt like a strange invitation. Not a project, a test, a mirror, a beginning. He stepped inside and the stale air clung to him like a memory he didn't want to revisit. The metal groaned beneath his weight. Rainwater pooled in corners. Everything was ruined. And still he saw light. He saw cedar walls where rust lived. He saw shelves curving with care where dented metal slumped. He saw the outline of a small home built by hands desperate to prove they still knew how to create instead of destroy. So Ford cinched his father's cracked leather tool belt, one of the last good things he still carried, around his waist and gripped the first rusted seat frame. His breath stuttered, his muscles shook, but the moment he wrenched that seat loose, something broke inside him in the best possible way. He wasn't running anymore. He wasn't hiding. He was building, one gritty, trembling breath at a time. The next weeks unfolded like a battle between the man Ford used to be and the man he was fighting to become. Every morning he left his motel room, threadbare carpet, cracked mirror, air thick with regret, and drove to Burton Finch's farm where the bus waited like a patient witness. He tore the seats out one by one, metal screaming as if protesting their eviction from years of abandonment. Blisters split. Rust cut him open. Sweat dripped into his eyes until the world blurred. And each night, instead of drowning his exhaustion in whiskey, he sat in the back of an AA meeting beneath flickering basement lights, reminding himself that rebuilding required choosing the hard road with shaky hands. Burton watched him work with gentle skepticism, bringing sandwiches at midday. Then one morning, a lanky teenager named Trey appeared, all elbows, oversized gloves, and a quiet eagerness that reminded Ford painfully of a young man he once was before the world hardened him. Trey needed community service hours and a place to belong. Ford needed a hand and a reminder that teaching was also healing. Together they stripped the bus down to its bones, scavenging insulation from demolished houses and sorting screws like treasure. As they worked, Trey confided about his absent father, and Ford, carefully, haltingly, shared pieces of the life he'd broken. And while the bus transformed from wreckage to possibility, something inside Ford began to steady. For the first time in years, he could feel a rhythm returning to his hands, one built from purpose, not escape. By the third month, the bus had begun to breathe again. Fresh cedar lined the walls, glowing warm under the shifting sun. Trey anticipated Ford's needs before he spoke, handing clamps, chisels, or measuring tapes with an intuition grown from hours of shared quiet. They worked with a rhythm that belonged to old-world craftsmen, slow, intentional, reverent. And at night, when loneliness threatened to crawl back into Ford's motel room, he carved, vines looping over cabinet faces, leaves curling like whispered apologies, patterns that soothed the restless edges of sobriety. Word spread through the county. Old men at the diner mentioned the bus project. Mothers brought leftover wood. Iris, the hardware store owner with eyes that saw straight through excuses, extended him credit and dropped off cedar planks she claimed were going to waste anyway. But the moment that shook him came the day his daughter called. Ansley's voice, older now steadier, drifted through static as she told him she was getting married. She wasn't ready to invite him, not yet, but she was ready to see if he'd changed. 6 months, she said. 6 months to show her he wasn't the man who'd broken every promise. Ford stood under the open sky, phone trembling in his hand, and vowed he wouldn't waste that chance. So he kept building, kept sanding, kept showing up. And every day, the bus grew more beautiful, and so did the hope he no longer dared to deny. But redemption never arrives without a storm. Burton's health began to fail, quietly at first, then with urgency, and the medical bills hit like a falling beam. The old farmer had no choice but to sell the land. 30 days. That was how long Ford had before the new developer reclaimed the field and everything on it. The bus, the home he'd poured his soul into, couldn't move under its own power. The tires were dead. The engine was beyond repair. He didn't have money for transport, land, or even a plan. That night, alone in his motel room, he stared at the bottle a previous tenant had left behind. His reflection stared back through cracked glass, 2 versions of himself, one begging to disappear, the other begging to stand. The knocking on his door saved him. Iris strode inside, took one look at the bottle, and dumped it down the sink. Then she showed him something Trey had done in secret, a crowdfunding campaign quietly posted 3 days earlier. Tens of thousands of dollars were pouring in. Notes from strangers saying his story gave them hope, photos of people restoring their own forgotten things, messages thanking him for proving second chances were real. Ford cried, silently, fiercely, and for the first time he let someone stay with him through the breaking. But the problem remained land. Every price was impossible. Every lead fell apart. And when the developer offered to keep the bus as a decorative installation, Ford refused. He hadn't built a monument. He de-built a future. And he wasn't ready to surrender it. Then the impossible happened. Conway Finch, Burton's cautious, skeptical son, returned with documents in hand and something Ford had never seen in his eyes before: respect. He apologized, not out of obligation, but from recognition. He'd watched Ford work through doubt, through fear, through the threat of losing everything. He'd watched the community rally behind him. And he'd come with a proposal that felt like the ground shifting beneath Ford's feet. Before selling the farm, they would parcel off 1 acre, the acre beneath the bus, and gift it to Ford. The crowdfunding money would pay Burton's medical bills. The sale price would adjust. Everyone would win. Ford tried to refuse. Burton wouldn't hear of it. "You've become family," the old man said, voice trembling but firm. "And family deserves somewhere to stand." When Ansley heard the news, she cried, hugging Ford with a closeness he'd thought he'd lost forever. Trey sprinted circles around the bus like a kid twice his age. Iris arrived with sparkling cider and a grin that told Ford she'd known this ending was possible before he dared imagine it. Neighbors arrived in waves, cheering, celebrating, claiming the moment as theirs because they'd carried him through every step. Ford walked the boundary of his new acre as evening settled, the land stretching around him with quiet acceptance. For the first time in decades, he wasn't standing on someone else's ground. This place, this soil, this sky, this future belonged to him. The bus stood proudly at the center, no longer a symbol of ruin but of resilience. And Ford knew the story wasn't ending. It was finally beginning. The workshop rose next, post by post, beam by beam, like another promise taking shape. Preston, Ansley's fiancé, sent detailed plans. Trey hammered with renewed confidence. Iris supplied materials, sometimes slipping extra items onto the invoice without comment. Burton arrived most afternoons, cane in hand, smile softening the wrinkles of his weathered face. The community came like a tide. Neighbors, former clients, kids Ford had never met. Together they raised the walls the way people used to, slow, deliberate laughter mixing with sweat. Inside the workshop, Ford's craft reawakened. Walnut, cherry, cedar, each piece of wood given new purpose under his steady hands. Orders began piling up. A carved box sold before the finish dried. A table commission arrived from a couple in the next county. A cabinet order came from a local cafe. Ford found himself waking each morning not with dread, but with anticipation. And between work, he and Ansley rebuilt their bond, one conversation at a time. She visited often, lingering to admire the grain on a cabinet or listen to Trey brag about learning joinery. She smiled at Ford in a way he had missed, a way that meant she saw him, not the shadow he used to be. The acre blossomed around them. Young trees lined the edges. Lanterns illuminated the nights. The bus glowed warm, lived-in, safe. Ford would sit some evenings on the steps, Trey beside him, listening to the first sounds of construction from the subdivision rising on the land beyond. But his acre, his story, remained untouched, protected, whole, and he finally understood the weight and wonder of a second chance earned honestly. 6 months after the deed became official, Ford adjusted his tie inside the bus, nervous in a way he'd never been even on the best days of his old life. Today, he would walk his daughter down the aisle. The walls around him glowed with the soft sheen of cedar, each panel shaped by months of steady hands and intentional living. Photos lined the shelves, Burton smiling in the sun, Trey holding the first board of the workshop, Iris handing him a can of stain with her stubborn grin, Ansley visiting for the first time. The bus wasn't just a home. It was his history rebuilt without shame. At the wedding venue, a beautiful barn strung with warm lights, Ansley rushed toward him in her gown, her voice cracking as she wrapped her arms around him. He gave her a carved cedar box with a letter inside, the words of a father who'd failed, fought, and risen again. She read it with tears streaking her cheeks. When he told her he was building her and Preston a dining table, solid enough to last generations, she pressed her forehead to his chest, whispering, "You're the man I knew you could be." Walking her down the aisle felt like stepping into a life he once feared he'd lost forever. And when they danced to the old James Taylor song he used to hum to her as a child, he held her with the gratitude of a man who'd crawled out of darkness and found sunlight waiting. That night, back on his acre, he sat inside the quiet bus and let the peace settle deep into his bones. Ford sat at his small fold-down desk, steam rising from a cup of tea, the night folded around the acre like a soft blanket. The workshop, lit gently from within, stood sturdy outside, proof of a future built one honest decision at a time. Crickets hummed, trees whispered. The bus walls held the warmth of every moment he nearly gave up and every moment he refused to. He ran a hand over the little wooden sparrow he'd carved during his darkest hours. It felt different now, not like a lifeline, but like a memory of who he chose not to remain. Tomorrow he would begin the final shaping of the walnut table for Ansley and Preston. Next month, he'd start on a commission from a couple who had driven hours just to see the place where a broken man had rebuilt something miraculous. And Ford understood, with a calm that settled deeper than relief, that redemption wasn't a destination. It was the daily work of becoming someone better, someone steadier, someone capable of love that didn't falter. He leaned back, listening to the quiet pulse of his land, and felt whole. The bus had become more than a home. It was a testament to the truth he'd fought hard to earn. Even rust can shine when given a chance. If this story spoke to you, if you felt it, lived inside it, believed in it, Take a moment to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story waiting in the dark. And before you go, where are you listening from, and what time is it where you are right now?